I am Dr. Nobuyuki Kambara, Professor of the Institute of Global Human Resource Development Institute at Okayama University, and I will be your moderator today. The title of this panel is Mobility Programs Beyond Academics, Global and Community Engagement. Today, we will hear from Professor Dan Dippo, Dr. Ana Maria Martinez, and Felipe Montoya, Nidhu, Jagoda, Dr. Addise Amado Dube, and finally, our youth speaker, Subati Haraji, will offer a brief reflection. Then we will begin the question and answer period. So please prepare lots of questions. Let me begin by introduce Professor Dan Dippo. Dan Dippo is a professor in the Faculty of Education at York University. His interests include the social and political organization of knowledge, environmental and sustainability education, global migration and settlement, university community relations, and teachers education. He is a co-director of the Borderless Higher Education for Refugee project, which brings post-secondary education opportunity to people in refugee camps in northeastern Kenya. He is on the executive committee on the Center of Refugee Studies at York University. He is also on the board of directors of Success Beyond Limits, which is a non-profit community organization that supports high school youth in Toronto Jane Finch community. Professor Dippo, welcome. I think you are on mute.
Yes, I was on mute. Welcome to the world of Zoom, huh? Okay, thank you, Dr. Kambara. Can I please have my slideshow up? Okay, I'd like to begin by thanking the conference organizers for their invitation to participate in the session this morning, afternoon or evening, depending on where you are in the world. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank my colleague, Prof. Ayen Kim, who is the BHER program administrator, for her help on this presentation. I'd like to start by making the point that in recent years there have been concerted efforts made by the UNHCR, by humanitarian organizations, philanthropic foundations, and some universities to increase access to higher education for refugees, forcibly displaced, and war-affected people. This is one way to increase access that's consistent with what's being called the third mission of the university. And that is for those of us who work in higher education to find ways to open our courses to the participation of refugees, forcibly displaced, and war-affected people everywhere. This morning, I want to focus specifically on the curricular and the pedagogical benefits of creating blended, integrated courses that include domestic students and international students who reside in refugee camps and other contexts of displacement. Next. Next slide, please. So this presentation is based on 10 years of experience co-directing and teaching in the Borderless Higher Education for Refugees project. This is a collaborative effort of 4 universities and 2 NGOs to bring university education to students in the Dube and the Kakuma refugee camps in Kenya. Next. The case I want to make for higher education for refugees, forcibly displaced, and war-affected people is organized around 3 themes. Now, the first theme is knowledge mobilization and contributions to scholarship. The second is community capacity building and improved quality of life. And the third is personal growth, dignity, and the capacity to aspire. So starting with the first of those thematics, knowledge mobilization, or new knowledge and the right to research. The photo on the screen is of a research symposium that is in the Dadaab refugee camps. It's a symposium that happened in April, which is the end of the academic year for our programs, both in Toronto and in the camps. And what you see here are undergraduate students presenting their own kind of year-long action research projects. There are also graduate students who are presenting the work that they're doing on their theses and MRPs. And the last day of, the last panel of the day in Dadaab was also the first panel of the day at the research symposium at York University that was organized by graduate students. So at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was a panel presentation of graduate students in Dadaab who were presenting their work to an academic conference at York University. The session happened at 7 o'clock in the morning, owing to the time differences, but the session was very well attended. Next slide, please. Next slide, yep. Okay, the second response to the question, why higher education for refugees, has to do with community capacity building and the right to research and advocacy. So students in our program are all become, over the course of their time studying with us, quite familiar with what it means to use the internet and to use online resources to search out literature, to address problems and issues that they might be having in the camp. They also become familiar with research techniques that enable them to collect evidence, to analyze data, to theorize about their situation, to mobilize knowledge by making PowerPoint presentations to the UNHCR sometimes, to civil society within the camps, to the NGOs, advocating on their own behalf with confidence and with research and with evidence and data to back up the kinds of positions that they want to take and the solutions they want to propose to some issues in the camps. Our graduates, in fact, have formed a community-based organization that's refugee-led and refugee resourced to do research, advocacy, and professional development in the camps. They currently are working under a contract to study and document the effects of COVID on education in refugee camps in Dadaab and Kakuma. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. And finally, I would like to highlight personal growth and development and the capacity to aspire. And here I'd like to quote from Appadurai, who says, the capacity to do research in this broad sense is also tied to what I've called the capacity to aspire, the social and cultural capacities to plan, hope, desire, and achieve socially valuable goals. The capacity to aspire and the right to research are necessary and intimately connected. Without aspiration, there is no pressure to know more, and without systematic tools for gaining relevant new knowledge, aspiration degenerates into fantasy and despair. So the impact that studying and access to higher education has had in the refugee camp community, I think you can see evidence in the photograph, and I'll speak later to the way the capacity to aspire has been kind of cultivated and supported through higher education. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is of a typical Zoom tutorial. Our blended and online courses are both synchronous and asynchronous, so students participate in online forums in an asynchronous manner, but they have weekly tutorials to bring together students from the refugee camps in Dadaab and in Kakuma, but also students in Toronto. And the slide is of a Zoom tutorial that happens typically at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning in Toronto and 2 or 3 in the afternoon in Dadaab. The slide that we're looking at is of a graduate seminar. But in the rest of this presentation, I would like to draw on a few examples from online discussion forums and want to argue that including students living in displacement enhances the quality of learning experience for all students by providing opportunities for students to engage with and to learn from others whose knowledges, histories, and experiences are radically different from their own. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a slide of in an undergraduate course of a TED Talk. The talk is entitled "The Girl Who Demanded School," and some of you may be familiar with this. It's the story of a young Maasai woman who wanted to be educated, who speaks to the kind of systematic barriers that she needed to overcome in order to access schooling. Can you click? You can see there's a discussion forum here that's taking place online. And if you click, you see that one of the things that happens is the Habo in Dadaab says how much she appreciated the video, and that the circumstances in the refugee camps are very similar to the ones that are described in the video. The barriers to women include early marriage and sex and gender-based violence, female genital mutilation, and so on. Student in Toronto responds with the question that says, well, I'm surprised to hear that though FGM has been deemed illegal in Kenya, that it's still a practice. Abalong participates by pointing out that it's not enough merely to change the law and to ban the practice, that there's a lot of work that needs to be done within cultural communities to begin to address the kinds of barriers that are described in the video and in the discussion forum. So, I mean, this is a conversation that unfolded over the course of several weeks about how, about the appropriateness of challenging certain cultural practices, about the uses of the law, about the place of education in advancing human rights agendas and gender equity and so on. Next slide, please. This is the text here is When Morning Comes. It's a novel about the Soweto uprising that the students in the course, in this undergraduate course, were discussing. Can you click on this slide and get the? Yeah, there we go. So in the context of students in Toronto, I mean, one of the ways that they responded to the text, and it's the point I want to make is about the importance of the relationship between topic and context and what kinds of conversations become possible in this kind of virtual exchange environment. Students in Toronto, I mean, most of the students in the undergraduate courses are in their 20s, they're away from home, they're living on campus or living in around the university. And one of the things that they were interested in this novel of the Soweto uprising is this question of interracial dating and interracial relationships. It's something that is felt and experienced acutely as students in Toronto. The student in Dadaab responds to the question and thanks people, as what happens in these forums, and thanks them for their comment, but points out that in the context that he's coming from, Ethiopia, that student uprisings are actually for him, the more salient feature of the conversation, and to talk about the uprisings and student roles in social change and so on. I think eventually what happened in this conversation is that the students in Toronto became also more engaged with questions of the appropriateness and the place of students, university student participation in social change movements. Students in Dadaab also opened up about questions of inter-ethnic relationships that are often take place and are not all that often spoken about in the camp. So, I mean, the conversation opened up topics for both sets of students, and over the course of time, they engaged with each other on those kinds of themes. Finally, next slide, please. Okay, this is in a graduate seminar where students are responsible for producing and contributing much more content to the courses. And this is an all-class discussion forum, and one of the students included a clip of when Trump announced the travel ban from mainly Muslim nations, generated some discussion in our all-class discussion forum. If you can click on the slide, please. The Fatuma, who's living in Puntland, says that for a long time, people are having to leave the Horn of Africa, and the Trump's administration has dramatically decreased importation and talks about the travel ban. In Canada, Nicole says, wonders why people are always talking about the United States and why are they not talking more about Canada? Don't people want to come to Canada? And the response from Fatuma in Puntland is that while Canada talks a good game, that in fact the experience of people in the Horn of Africa is that many more people are settled in the United States, and that while Canada talks a good game about being open and welcoming, that maybe they aren't as welcoming as Canadians like to believe or told that they are. So, I mean, this was also an interesting discussion about national imagery and what it is that people believe in terms of their own responses to the crisis of migration. Okay, next slide, please. Just to make the point here that the new knowledge and contributions to scholarship, these early morning sessions, online discussions forums, and so on, students have taken to presentations. I mean, in the upper left, you'll see this is at York University, but the panel that's making a presentation is in Dube, and the photo to the right is of inside Dube and taking part in a presentation that's originating from Toronto. Students have presented at conferences. I think that increasingly, as we have graduate students in Dube, more and more graduate students are co-authoring pieces that are being published. So the access to education has given them the capacity to contribute to knowledge and participate in academic forums across the globe. Next slide, please. Their students work as teachers, mobilizers, health promoters in Kenya. Many of them have taken to returning to Somalia to become public school teachers or founding new schools, hired by NGOs. We have one person who's returned as a midwife instructor in Somalia. Students in Canada, I think, become much more informed teachers, settlement workers, refugee rights advocates. Graduate students begin to become much more involved in scholarship around forced migration. I must be coming close to the end of my time. I'm sorry. Next slide, please. Okay, around growth, dignity, and the capacity to aspire. These are the Komonyo brothers. They left the Democratic Republic of Congo and used to only dream of the day when they will be relocated. They've all earned degrees now, and one is enrolled in the graduate program. And the capacity to aspire, their plans have changed. They no longer dream of the day when they will be relocated to another country, but are making plans to return to Congo, confident that they have ideas, that they have the skills and the knowledge necessary to make a contribution to bring peace to the country that they fled so many years ago. Next slide, please. Also, personal growth and dignity. This is a Ugandan refugee who was one of the founding members of the community-based NGO. For a host of reasons, he has no expectation ever to return to Uganda. He also is of an age that he thinks that his chances of resettlement in another country have passed. He expects to live the rest of his life in exile, but finds participation in post-secondary education. The founding of the NGO gives much meaning, purpose, and turns him into a community leader and a community activist. So he imagines actually a better future for himself and his children, as he speaks to in the quote. And then finally, next slide, please. Just a quote from Nina, who says, "This degree is making us feel important. Here we can interact with so many different people from different cultures. We learn a lot from one another, including students at York University in Toronto." And the final slide. Just to end by quoting Apadare again, "Most of all, there's the additional urgency regarding research as a human right and creating new institutions that enable building the capacity for research. If research is about anything, it's about the ability to create new knowledge. Without new knowledge, there can be no new futures." And final slide. Thank you. And if you'd like to know more about the Borderless Higher Education, you can go to the link, which is located at the bottom of the slide. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Dan Dippo. Next, we will hear from our second presenters, Dr. Ana Maria Martinez, who is research associate at York University, and Philip Montoya. Dr. Martinez received her PhD in education from York University. She explored how policy and praxis influence climate change curricula and curricular formation in higher educational institutions. She has analyzed the behaviors of giant river otters in the Colombian Amazon and has explored conservation of endangered species of sea turtles in the Colombian Caribbean. She also holds a master's in environmental studies, a specialization in environmental law, and a bachelor in marine biology. I am very sorry that I was just informed about Philip Montoya Sensei just joining, so I don't know any bio information. Could you say a little about yourself?
Sure, no problem. Thank you. And greetings to everyone, all the panelists and attendees. My name is Felipe Montoya. I'm the director of the Las Nubes project, which is a study abroad project and an eco-campus in Costa Rica. It belongs to York University. I've been the director since 2012. This is a project that is dedicated to education, research, and community engagement. I am an environmental anthropologist, and previously I was a biologist. So I combine the social sciences and the natural sciences, and I've been working with indigenous and peasant communities in Costa Rica for the last 20 years. So happy to be here, and please excuse the background noise that is, I can't control that.
Thank you very much. Well, let's give Dr. Martinez and Montoya Sensei a warm welcome.
Thank you. Hani, I think that you have our presentation ready. Hello everyone, my name is Ana Martinez. I am the research associate for the Las Nubes project. I am here with the director of the project, Dr. Felipe Montoya, to answer any questions you may have later on the program. But first, I will give you a brief introduction to the project and to our work in Costa Rica. Donated to York University in the late 1990s, Las Nubes is a biological reserve located on the Pacific slopes of the Talamanca Range. It is also located at the southwest corner of the Chirripó National Park, which is connected to the International Park La Amistad. Today, Costa Rica protects 27% of its territory through a national system of protected areas, including parks and natural reserves. In the late 1990s, the heads of the Central American states met in Panama as part of the Central American Alliance for Sustainable Development and agreed to the establishment of the Mesoamerican Biological Corridor. Following this commitment, in 2006, Costa Rica formally established the National Program for Biological Corridors, with the goal to meet its international obligations by implementing a framework for projects undertaken in buffer zones around protected areas. By 2016, 44 corridors had been established covering over 33% of the national territory. Las Nubes is located within a 60 square kilometer corridor called the Alexander Scotch Biological Corridor. In the early 2000s, York University, the Tropical Science Center, which is a Costa Rican NGO, and renowned ornithologist Alexander Scotch, who owned Los Cusingos, had moved forward on a project to establish a biological corridor between Las Nubes, this red area here, and Los Cusingos. Through this initiative, 7 communities were engaged in a joint effort for research, conservation, and sustainable development. It is important to note that the Alexander Scotch Biological Corridor is an initiative that precedes the 2006 National Framework. At the onset, the primary objective of the Las Nubes project was to restore and protect the biodiversity in the corridor through the promotion of sustainable agricultural practices on a regional landscape level. With the arrival of Felipe Montoya in 2012, the focus shifted to contributing to community well-being in ways that are conducive to environmental conservation. The project does this through 3 main pillars: research, education, and community engagement. Examples of our work with the community are, for instance, a brand of coffee that was established through a partnership between a local co-op, Copeagri, a roaster in Toronto called Timothy's World of Coffee, and York University. The goal of this was to support smallholder coffee production, which was and continues to be one of the main economic activities in the area, and at the same time incentivize the use of more sustainable practices, for instance, shifting from sun to shade-grown coffee, or to reduce the use of agrochemicals, or the implementation of fair trade practices. Another project was the establishment of Casita Azul, the Little Blue House, where Las Nubes project, in collaboration with the library at York University, entered into an agreement with the local Aqueduct Administrator Association of Santa Elena to share their facilities and to run a local library and resource center with computers, internet, and a meeting room. Las Nubes project hired a local librarian, and Casita Azul became a hub of training opportunities provided mostly through agreements with the National Institute of Learning of Costa Rica. Casita Azul offers access to computers, books, and internet to local students to do their schoolwork. York University students also created a preschool program, which has been carried out by Casita Azul as part of their weekly programming. Training in the use of computers and other abilities such as cooking, organic agriculture, food processing, among others, are also organized by Casita Azul using local resources and expertise. Perhaps one of the most impactful changes was the establishment of a new policy in the mid-2010s, where students are required to stay with local families throughout the length of the course. This small change has had a major impact in our students, who experience how real day-to-day life is in rural Costa Rica, but also by contributing to the local economy, where a significant number of households, after providing room and board to students, have found a new to the area venture in the form of rural community tourism as a viable option for local livelihood improvement. Here is a message from one of these homestay families sent last August to the Las Nubes Alumni Network.
Hola chicos, somos la familia Arias Picado. Hemos compartido con muchos estudiantes canadienses. No digo nombres porque se me va a olvidar algunos, pero a todos los recuerdo y fue una experiencia muy linda compartir con ellos. Espero en Dios podernos volver a ver algún día. Yo Ha sido un placer. Estas palabras para ellos.
Saludos.
Saludos a todos.
In the early 2010s, and after noticing that the existence of a biological corridor was not yet internalized by the majority of the residents of the communities within the corridor's borders, the Las Nubes project and participant students in the 2013 summer field course organized a festival over a weekend to celebrate the figure of Alexander Scotch in order to create awareness of the Alexander Scotch biological corridor and to offer a window into the community's wealth, including the natural, cultural, scientific, artistic, and agricultural resources, as a way of igniting a sense of identity and belonging to the corridor among the local population. Moreover, the festival was also an opportunity for local residents to exhibit and sell their products, meet prospective clients, while interacting with their international visitors. This festival was soon taken over by local organizers, becoming a renowned festival and renamed Expo Covas, attracting thousands of attendees and celebrated annually and recurrently on the weekend closest to the Alexander Scotch's birthday on May 20th, with the exception of 2020, year in which the festival was suspended to the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 500 students have participated in at least one of our field courses in Costa Rica since 2006. In 2017, when we established the semester abroad program during the summer, not only the number of students increased, but also the participation of students from other faculties at York University. It is important to note here that a considerable number of undergraduate students who have taken our courses are inspired to pursue their graduate studies, and many graduate students, after having the opportunity to explore a wide range of issues in Costa Rica, are persuaded to conduct their research at Las Nubes. Throughout the years, the students' feedback and testimonials had made it clear that our courses and programs offer unparalleled learning opportunities to students through interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary experiences. The reputation of our programs has transcended York, and we have had inquiries from students from other universities in Canada and the US. Here is a testimonial of a 2019 alumnus, Mohammed Yasir Khan.
My name is Mohammed Yasir Khan, and I'm a graduate of York University. And yeah, regarding Las Nubes, I think it was the best opportunity I had during my time at York University, especially going out of the country, because that was also my first time going to Costa Rica.
We arrived in the area in the late 1990s with the idea of protecting the biological diversity and integrity of Las Nubes. We have since come to understand, as the past 20 years have demonstrated, that to succeed in maintaining a balance between an agroecological matrix of mature forest fragments and productive sustainable farming systems which mimic natural systems, this biological corridor cannot be perceived merely as a biophysical canvas upon which agroecological techniques are implemented, but rather as a space of multiple intersecting and interconnecting layers that mutually influence each other, affecting the entire matrix. The biological corridor is a space with its own particular biophysical characteristics, but also one that includes humans and their social, economic, political, ideological, and spiritual institutions, with rules and practices that are constantly at play. Its design status as a biological corridor has provoked imaginaries that are manifested in social and discursive interactions, in material and productive practices. As a higher educational institution, we have understood our role in the Alexander Scotch Biological Corridor as partners. We sit on the Corridor's Council, and as any other member, we are subjected to the Council's directives and aspirations for the corridor. Our students, before undertaking any research project, must seek the Council's approval, and our faculty tries to encourage students to pursue projects within the framework of the strategic plan for the corridor. It is in gaining the community's trust and support that we have been able to accomplish many projects, including the detection and protection of endangered species, or that we are able to bring students to the community and have open and meaningful conversations. Our actions are contained within a framework that reminds us of the need to direct our practices in ways that respect the principles of this space, that includes a healthy habitat for non-human animals and their coexistence with us. It challenges the concept of biodiversity as a natural resource to be used for the goals of sustainable development, but rather as members of a larger biotic community of which humans also form part. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Martinez and Mr. Montoya Sensei. And our third speaker is Nidhu Jagoda. Nidhu Jagoda is pursuing a Master of Climate Change at the University of Waterloo. Her research includes emerging technologies and innovations, sustainable development policy framework, and climate change diplomacy and partnership development. She is a network coordinator for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Canada Youth Chapter. She has served on the board of numerous executive committees at UW and has received several academic honors. Ms. Jagoda, we look forward to hearing from you now.
Thank you for that warm introduction. And hello everyone, my name is Nidhu, and today I'll be talking to you about the case of internationalization beyond academics, and I'll be making a very high-level case, so looking forward to it. And I'd like to start with a brief overview of what the SDGs are. So the Sustainable Development Goals, for those of you who might not be as familiar, are a set of 17 robust goals that provide a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all, and to ensure that no one is left behind. They set out this framework to address a multitude of global challenges, and this includes poverty, hunger, inequality, and climate change. Oh, next slide, sorry. Next slide, please. And they're based on the premise that the SDGs apply to every country equally, and that the success of any goal is linked to the development of others. So currently, we are in this decade of action to meet our goals by 2030. Progress is being made in many places, but overall the action that we need to take, or the speed and scale required, is not there. So we need to seek transformative solutions and actions, and not more of just sustaining the unsustainable. And that's where post-secondary institutions come in. Next slide, please. So higher education institutions and academic mobility programs are powerful drivers of innovation and accelerating action on the SDGs. They contribute to everything from capacity building for research, large mobilization of competent and dedicated talent, external leadership and partnership opportunities, cross-sectoral dialogue, and they even speak to the larger picture within policy development and advocacy. But in a post-pandemic world, is the actualization of this cosmopolitan ideal sustainable? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves when planning for the future. And beyond just the issue of the pandemic, there needs to be considerations about environmental sustainability of physical mobility programs, as well as the degree of inclusivity. As physical portions of these mobility programs will by default leave people out. And in this process of increasing internationalization, where does that leave local community engagement and the action piece? So we need to consider beyond just physical student exchanges and the crossing of borders as our only way of collaboration and exchange. Next slide, please. Next slide. So it's important to realize and recognize that no single institution or government can take on this work alone. And that's why I would like to bring to your attention the model or the concept of higher education institutions fostering growth and partnership with networks, especially youth-led ones. In fact, students moving through these higher education systems are a key group of catalysts who can be mobilized to learn, think, and act as agents of change. These type of global networks go beyond simply academic internationalization and go to further empower and generate localized action in communities. It generates more, it creates more alignment and cooperation from the global back to local piece. And so regional and national chapters within networks, and especially those that are based out of higher education institutions, provide the reach and the context, the local context, to expand movements to a global scale. And this kind of targeted approach and focused mobilization and of community engagement is particularly impactful when we consider scaling initiatives around the SDGs. Next slide, please. So global networks facilitate resource sharing and collaboration, so much in the same way as their partner institutions would. But beyond academics, they present an opportunity for youth and other stakeholders of the community to take ownership and leadership of local action around the SDGs. They apply and normalize the concept of international workforces. The networks facilitate this cross-border collaboration constantly. And they have a clear and targeted vision where areas as higher education institutions, because of their overall definition and missions and multiple stakeholders, they have a much more of a broader scale or umbrella mission or vision, if you want to say. So networks support communities to design their own SDG solutions, generate local momentum, and provide resources and tools, as well as case studies to inspire and support further action. It leverages technological opportunities as a direct result of the network format. Most of them are global in scale and are based out of regional hubs, so they operate remotely. And this basically means that even in times like COVID, the operations, international resource sharing, and collaboration components don't slow down. And this independence from physical mobility is what makes them more inclusive and accessible, I would argue, especially to regions of the network that have marginalized and underserved populations. Next slide, please. So these type of networks are already gaining traction, and this slide just displays a few examples of existing networks. And I'd like to highlight some of the work around the Sustainable Development Solutions Network specifically. So next slide. And so just to show you what these networks are capable of, the Sustainable, or SDSN, was conceptualized in 2012 under UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon as a movement to build a network of universities, research centers, civil society organizations, and knowledge institutions to basically facilitate learning and accelerate problem solving for the SDGs. Canada is among the newer country chapters. It was only created in 2018. Its mandate is to engage, educate, and mobilize local action around the SDGs. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of where we are today in the network. So globally, here's some stats. There's more than 1,100 member institutions. with more than across 50 national and regional chapters. And there's been more than 500 local solutions that have been incubated through this network. And on the next slide, thank you. So this slide just highlights some of the global projects and initiatives that SDSN has delivered within the few years they've been active, and they're quite diverse in range. This list includes everything from educational tools for the SDGs to scientific modeling and identifying of policy pathways, localized SDG programs, and Canada has been particularly active in this capacity, especially developing indicators and benchmarks for municipalities to track their SDG performance. And finally, the youth-led initiatives towards SDG action. So the thing I would hope that you all take away from this is that the partnerships of higher education institutions and networks enable high impact and localized action around the SDGs. It facilitates resource sharing and capacity building beyond academics and promotes ownership and leadership of action between the many stakeholders and communities. These remote-based learning models make them more resilient, and especially in times of crisis, but they make them also more inclusive in general. So with that being said, I'd like to leave you all with a quote. Next slide. And this quote aligns strongly with how I perceive the SDGs framework. By defining our goal more clearly, by making it seem more manageable and less remote, we help all people to see it, to draw hope for it, and to move irresistibly towards it. Thank you.
Let's give Nidhu Jagoda our warm thanks for her presentation. Our fourth speaker today is Dr. Addise Amado Dube. Dr. Dube is a PhD researcher at Oxford Center for Mission Studies, Middlesex University. His theme is the culture of cleanliness, modernization effort in improving sanitation in Ethiopia, and roles of FBOs. He leads practicum courses and field education program on development studies, and is head of development and communications at the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Dr. Dube will discuss our responsibility to bring back knowledge, innovative practices, and international experiences to our own schools and host communities, and threshold between academia and community service from the practitioner's perspective. Please.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for your kind introduction. I guess you are hearing me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I have a connection problem, and that might happen anytime, but I'll try to manage from my side. So I'll be focusing on the local context and also the practitioner's point of view in relation to higher education teaching and research. Next slide, please. Just to give you an overview of the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology is a higher educational institution that provides mainly theological education, but also getting engaged in development studies, management and leadership, focusing on teaching and research, which get connected to community engagement through student exchange with other institutions, student attachment to churches and communities, volunteer service to communities, and also individual student practicum and group fieldwork, which is directly connected to local grassroots communities. And I'll be sharing some of this experience from the ground reality. Next, please. The fact that moving students from their residential dormitories, from classrooms, from libraries, is the starting point where mobility happens and challenge, especially students who are in an urban setting, who have never been to village, who have never been to darkness, who have never been to drink dirty water. So it means really a lot traveling to remote rural areas for students means not only really an experience of international context, but thinking locally and acting locally. This is very important. Next, please. And that means also facing the challenge that rural communities, village communities daily face in terms of transportation, in terms of rainfall, in terms of dust. And that is where they can sense what life is in a classroom setting, in a library, and in a remote village. And that will challenge students of international standard or local standard, and that will challenge daily in their classrooms. Next, please. Just the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology provides health, gender, and theology program. And in this picture, the Addis Ababa Fistula Hospital, which is one of its kind in the world, providing services for the victims of obstetric fistula, usually caused by prolonged labor complications, is where our students go and learn and bring experience to the curriculum, to the teaching, to the research. And this type of engagement inspires students to make more research, more engagement, more problem-solving activities throughout their educational journey and also in their career development. Next, please. This is also related to a hospital attachment of our students, in order that they get engaged with other like-minded practitioners like doctors, nurses, laboratory technicians, social workers, where they will also see, observe, engage, interact, and then bring back those experiences to the classroom and to the curriculum. Next, please. This is also an engagement in a rural primary hospital where our health and gender students are interacting with laboratory technicians and nurses. Next, please. In our gender problem, we have also an experience of working with grassroots women groups. These are best experienced women who have faced life challenge and experiences, and sharing those experiences to our students and our researchers and faculty. As you can see in this image, the women group as entrepreneurs are sharing their experiences, their challenge, in order that those will be reflected in policy, in practice, in business, and also in advocacy. Next, please. Yeah, this is a handicrafts where our students get engaged in handicraft production with women groups. Next, please. Our students also get engaged with farmers, where indigenous knowledge is generated for generations, where our students and faculty listen to what the farmers say. And in this picture, you can vividly see in a remote village where our students are engaged with a lecture from a farmer. Next, please. Yeah, this is a sugarcane manufacturing and sugarcane farm, which is also part of linking agriculture to manufacturing and industry, where students also, especially community development students, get engaged in food security agenda. Next, please. Yeah, our students also get engaged with pastoralists. In this picture, you can see the students going far away, 600 kilometers away, to a pastoralist pond side where they get engaged with community members and listen to community wisdom. Next, please. This is a flower farm. It has also an environmental element in it. Next, please. Yeah, we have also partnership with some universities, especially Lafana University in Lüneburg, Germany, where professors from German university come to our school and train teachers and students in order that they get in community work. Next, please. Yeah, next, please. Thank you. Next, please. So the key question and the response to the discussion is that students need to meet community members and engage with them, discuss with them, make dialogue, and sense life in reality. Next, please. The pictures are self-explanatory, I guess. And also our students record community heritage in remote areas and bring that for discussion in classrooms, in research agenda as well. Next, please. They also experience rural life, like riding horses, farming, and also collecting firewood, collecting water with women groups, and these types of experience will add to knowledge. Next, please. Students also share from their own resources to community. In this picture, they are going to rehabilitation center, carrying bread and some groceries for those most affected in rehabilitation centers. Next, please. School environment protection is in this picture. So yearly, year come, year out, we'll also get engaged in greening the environment. Next, please. Yeah, next, please. Thank you. So to summarize, I think mobility programs, be it local or international, will provide service to community. It serves the community. It is very important. It also generates feedback and knowledge to curriculum, inform teaching learning process, inspire research agenda, enhance knowledge, skill, and attitudes of researchers and students. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, the problem now is how do we generate knowledge and also share that knowledge to the community? And the problem is that there is a threshold and there is no. There is no, because some intellectuals still want to colonize knowledge as the hands of the few, the so-called elite, by underestimating community indigenous knowledge, and there is a reluctance to go to the community and bring knowledge, experience, and practice. And there are some in between in higher education who want to get engaged in community and who are also sometimes indifferent. And there is also a threshold in some higher education institutions like my own, struggling to make a link where community engagement will benefit the curriculum and the whole teaching process. Next. Thank you very much. Sorry for the long presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dube, for your informative presentation. Finally, we will hear from our youth speaker, Sabati Balaji, who will offer a brief reflection. Let's hear now from Sabati Balaji, please.
Thank you so much, Professor Kambara. And I just wanted to take this time to thank the entire panel for offering such just eye-opening research about what they're doing and all the things that are happening. And I think what is happening right now is so crucially and critically important. Being an international student myself, like I studied in India and then I had to move to the US and then now studying here at York in Toronto. I really think that being in a community and like all of these different changes in the culture that I was in shaped me to be the person that I am today, like being more cognizant of all the difficulties that a fellow classmate is facing, or like someone that I talked to on like public transportation pre-COVID is facing. It just made me so much more aware and like appreciative of all the things that we have. Which leads me to the question, and this is like an open question to the panel because everyone's doing like such radical like research in so many different areas. How has the pandemic like affected any of the programs or the research that is being conducted?
Thank you very much. Actually, you are asking a question. So from the panelist, would you please answer her question? Anyone?
I mean, I can speak for a second about the response to the question. The COVID has impacted the program that I work in fairly dramatically. Our teaching and learning there has always been dependent on technology and connectivity and so on, but it's also true that our students have been able to travel to the Learning Center to access computer labs and stable internet and so on. And during the times of COVID, when people are sheltering in place, it has meant that they have been unable to access the Learning Center and stable computer connections and have had to do most of their studying using their phones. And using laptops and tablets is one thing. Trying to accomplish university education relying so heavily on cell phone technology has been a very big struggle for them. So we look forward to the day when people will be able to move around again and access the resources that we have come to depend upon, even in technologically mediated teaching and learning.
And anyone else?
I can also speak to how the pandemic affected the Las Nubes project. All our courses are heavily based on experiential education. And so when we had to cancel the courses last summer, we started to think about those rich conversations that we had with the community when we were able to be there. And so we came as a group and started to think about other ways in which we could perhaps overcome the fact that we couldn't travel. So out of that resulted a new project that is called Grounded. And we just started filming. Well, Felipe is based in Costa Rica, so he's conducting interviews with community members, and this became another project where we will be able to offer those conversations. And in the process of collecting and gathering this data, these videos or footage, we also are developing live conversations and workshops with community members, which Felipe will facilitate. And so we're just trying to reinvent ways in which we can reach our community members and bring those experiences that they always offer to our students. And so that's what we're doing for now.
Another another element that the COVID has affected is our community partners that receive students. This year were not able to have anyone in their homestays, and so the local economies have also been affected in that sense. So everyone is expectant that things will go back to normal, as they say, because it has affected not only the experiential part of students, but also the economic aspect of community members. So we're doing a intermediate type of solution and trying to take experiential events back to the students in terms of digital media. And in the same way, we do engage with local people in the interviews, and that also encourages them that this program will continue and won't go by the wayside.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, mobility is so much affected by COVID, and that directly affected, especially in the technology limited areas like in Ethiopia, where online learning is very limited because of connectivity problems, technology problems. So it is like being handicapped and closing and shutting down everything because online learning is very much limited. And in terms of research also, you cannot interview people, you cannot move, you cannot do focus group discussions, your ethical clearance will be declined. So it is like, a shutdown.
Nidhu, do you have any comments?
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute myself there. In terms of mobility programs, they definitely take a hit when you talk about the pandemic or any type of disruptive geopolitical happening in the world. But this presents an opportunity where there's also a threat. It's where we can be the most creative, imaginative, and innovative. There's all these tools available to us now that previously 10 years ago would not have been. And one of those is definitely the internet. And so there's obviously issues with accessibility, inclusivity there as well. But these types of programs can have a further reach and even a broader scope when they reach out to localities, because everything can be done remotely as long as there's internet access. So there's a big if there. But this allows us that opportunity to kind of rethink our structures, whether it's online teaching or mobilization for action. What does action look like virtually? And all these questions of how we organize and work together around the SDGs, especially in times like a pandemic.
Thank you. Do you have any reactions, Sabati?
No, that would be all, Professor. Thank you so much. Thank you so very much.
We got a question. Actually, Professor Dippo, you got two questions. One question is, thank you. I find this work is very interesting. I am wondering if facilitation and intervention was done to help make sure the virtual discussions were respectful when the students were chatting about sensitive topics. This is one question. And another question is, what have been some of the most significant obstacles the project has encountered? Would you please answer these two questions?
Yes, thank you for those questions. The first question with respect to discussions, I mean, I think that productive, respectful, and genuinely engaging discussion doesn't just happen. It doesn't just happen in face-to-face classrooms, and it doesn't just happen in online environments either. So we do are very deliberate and in setting up parameters and reminding people about what it takes to create a worthwhile and inclusive online discussion. So, I mean, we would lay out those kinds of parameters and guidelines at the outset of the course, but make that topic itself something that we return to quite regularly. So at the end of a discussion, or to ask the question, what do you think about how this unfolded? Was there a way that we might have done this differently? So the question about how to participate well and how to create environments that are open, inclusive, safe, but also challenging is kind of an ongoing project that we set for ourselves. And I think that when we're able to accomplish it, people recognize the benefits, and it's an experience that unfortunately is unique. Often people say, I've never had a discussion quite like this. So when you pay attention to creating conditions for good discussion, I think it pays off in the long run. In terms of challenges, I think that funding is always a challenge for projects like all the projects that all of us have presented. I mean, there's never enough funding. I think that sometimes in contexts that I work, higher education is seen often as a luxury when you are working in very fragile contexts. So that's, you always need to convince people of the worthwhileness of higher education in conflict situations. And the other thing is that very often a mismatch between the instability and unpredictability of life as lived in fragile contexts and the expectation of funding agencies and bureaucratic institutions that things will unfold on timelines, and you set goals and and deliverables at this time. We are constantly asking for extensions and exceptions and petitions because none of what it is that we do fit comfortably into the structures that we've built for ourselves that are often quite rigid.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Dippo. We got actually a few more questions, but time is limited. So this marks the end of the panel for activities now. I'd like to give my sincere thanks to my fellow panelists for sharing their expert knowledge and opinions. I would like also thank the audience members for their attendance and contribution to the discussion. Now, I would like to make a transition announcement to introduce a